Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be reviewing once again a Daytona, but slightly different version, this time in stainless steel. So no wristwatch check necessary because I am in fact wearing this gorgeous piece. We'll get into the specifications and the history and all the rest of it in just a moment. But I have to say something kind of important, really, and it speaks about the journey of watch collecting is, of course, after a week of reviewing, wearing, shooting, and by the time I come to edit this, I have become rather ensorcelled and bewitched by the Daytona, which is funny because it's a watch I never really liked, to be honest, back in the day. And of course, now I've reviewed several of them. I've caught the Daytona bug, and last night I caught myself on the Watchbox website looking at prices, considering which one should I go for. Story of my life. And by the way, there'll be a listing for this particular one down in the comments below. But anyway, it's a bit like the Explorer. You know, I used to consider that watch kind of boring, and then of course I tried it, fell in love, and now it's my favorite watch. So you never really know where this journey is going to take you. Anyway, without further ado, let's discuss a little bit of the history, and you'll probably start to understand why I've become a little bit obsessed with the Daytona. Rolex is not a brand you immediately think of when one says chronograph. However, the few times they have made them, they have become the stuff of legends. Let's not forget the most expensive wristwatch ever sold at auction was, of course, the Paul Newman Daytona. But the story starts a little earlier. In 1935, British racing car driver Sir Malcolm Campbell set the land speed record at the wheel of his Bluebird on the Salt Flats in Utah, and he was wearing his own Rolex watch. He even wrote to Rolex, telling the company he was very impressed by the Oyster's durability and thanking them. Sir Malcolm broke the world speed record 9 times between 1924 and 1935, including 5 times at Daytona Beach in Florida. This in turn then inspired the brand, and the cogs of ingenuity started to turn. Among the early chronographs to come from the brand was during World War II. In typical Rolex fashion, the brand supplied these oyster-cased beauties to the right people at the right time and place. This time it was Allied POWs who then used the chronographs to assist timing their daring escapes. Despite this now unintended marketing triumph, the famed Great Escape chronographs were not commercially successful, and thus it would be some time before the brand would return to making watches with this complication again. Now, with the war over and motor racing booming, it was time Rolex made their own racing chronograph. And in 1955, Rolex launched its reference 6234 chronograph. Neither Cosmograph or Daytona appeared on the dial, but simply labeled chronograph. These manual wind Valjoux-based watches were manufactured until the 1960s, and again were not successful, languishing on dealers' shelves. This was mainly because other manufacturers had long since established themselves as chronograph specialists. Ironically, these pre-Daytonas are now highly desired and fetch astronomical prices. However, despite at the time not doing well sales-wise, most of the design traits that would later define the Daytona already were beginning to take form. The compact dial layout, the piston head pushers, and the tachymeter to compute speed-based travel time or measure distance based on speed. Rolex was determined not to give up, and with a plucky spirit of fortitude, it saw the fruition of a second generation that would now establish Rolex as a great chronograph maker. With the addition of some marketing genius, Rolex decided to return to the racetrack in Florida, where Sir Martin Campbell had made history while wearing his beloved Rolex. Rolex became the official timekeeper for the Daytona racecourse in 1962, 1 year prior to the debut of the Cosmograph reference 6239. Rolex then nicknamed this model the Daytona the same year to further emphasize the watch's affiliation with the prestigious race. To improve the watch itself, they made the tachymeter scale on the bezel significantly larger to its counterparts on most other watches. The watch was catching on, and the reference 6239 attracted not just the name Daytona finally adorning the dial, but a celebrity devotee in the late 60s too. Paul Newman wasn't merely an actor, he was also an outstandingly talented race car driver. His Daytona watch subsequently accompanied him on his races and movies. As a result, during the 1980s, collectors gave the nickname Paul Newman to this particular style of Daytona. It can be instantly recognized, mainly due to the contrastingly colored second scale along the dial's periphery, as well as the slight Art Deco-inspired script on the subsidiary dials. After 1969, the watch world irrevocably changed forever as brands competed in the Great Race to produce the world's first automatic chronograph, while simultaneously the quartz crisis was also occurring. With manual wind watches becoming increasingly seen as dated, it was only natural that the Daytona had to move with the times. Rolex decided, after a relatively long time, to then introduce the self-winding Daytona reference 16520 in 1988. Initially, they used Zenith's renowned El Primero movement and made major changes, including slowing down its frequency from 36,000 to 28,800 vibrations an hour. This resulted in a longer power reserve and longer service intervals. Rolex renamed the movement the 4030 and also made major revisions to the case, bracelet, dials and pushers. Along with flat sapphire glass, this evolution culminated in the year 2000 with their first entirely in-house caliber, the caliber 4130, and incidentally, this is still used to this day, and we see it here in this particular reference we're looking at today. Now I'm going to interrupt the history section just very briefly because I should mention it's also been in James Bond. The reference 6238, the pre-Daytona, was actually on Her Majesty's Secret Service on the wrist of none other than one-time Bond George Lazenby. So it's even been a Bond watch at some point. Okay, it didn't have a very long run, but we should mention it all the same. This is the reference 116520. It operates at 28,800 vibrations an hour. It has KIF shock absorbers for its balance and escape wheel. For the last decade or so, they went on to feature the blue parachrome hairspring for extra protection from magnetism. However, this particular earlier model features the previous Breguet overcoil. It is hackable, unlike its Zenith-based predecessor, and naturally COSC certified too for that superlative accuracy. The new movement, just like its El Primero predecessor, has column wheel switching as well. Vertical coupling assures the smooth start and stop for the elapsed seconds hand. So you can actually leave it running as long as you want, and it won't have any additional wear and tear, a major advantage of the vertical clutch. A whole plethora of dials, colors and choices of precious metals was by now available, pushing the watch ever further from its racing tool roots and more into a high-end luxury direction. Ensuring its status symbol allure, it ultimately became the choice of celebrities, movie stars and motor racing enthusiasts the world over. But let's rewind a little bit, because this particular model is perhaps the ideal balance between the two worlds of functionality and luxury. So here we have a contemporary offering from the early 2000s. In terms of dimensions, we have a 40mm case in diameter, a very cuff-friendly height of only 12.3mm, impressive considering it's an automatic chronograph, From lug to lug, we're looking at 46.7 millimeters with a lug width of 20 millimeters, making it very, very compatible and easy to match and pair with any strap. These proportions, in my opinion, are just utter perfection. The fit of this watch will please all wrists, and along with its easy link extension system, which I'll just show you now, hidden in the clasp, it gives you a choice or a variation of an extra 5 millimeters. It wears incredibly comfortably. It feels solid and gives the wearer confidence. The weight, depending on how many of the screwed links you have, is around 140 grams, and it's distributed perfectly, especially compared to the rather top-heavy super cases from Rolex that came after the era of this watch. The Oyster bracelet has completely solid center links and end links, and are in a high polish flanked by your more typical satin brushed sections, contrasting the entirely high polish of the Oyster case. The clasp is one of my favorites, and it's a million miles away from the rather flimsy days of old. Apart from the handy extension system, we also get an extra fold over for added security. And I must say, these modern clasps are splendidly constructed, further accentuating that feel of quality. Around the slightly stepped, flat sapphire glass is a gently sloping and comparatively wide bezel, complete with engraved, then lacquer-filled numerals for the tachymeter. So the question is here, how do you tell the zenith from the later in-house Rolex movement? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple if you missed my previous Daytona video. The register for the 12 hours of the chronograph on the Rolex one is at the 9 o'clock, where on the Zenith it's actually at the 6 o'clock. Essentially, that is the telltale sign. To the right, we have those screw-down pushers, which are especially useful if you are timing and you do not wish to accidentally interrupt it. And like the screw-down crown, they also ensure a highly practical water resistance of 100 meters. So in fact, you could actually race boats if you wanted to, just as well as racing cars. Unquestionably, the main appeal and what really ties the watch together, well, for me at least, is the dial. The unrivaled daisy white gloss color contrasts with the intricately precise black printing flawlessly, especially when it comes to reading the seconds track at the periphery of the dial there. This effectiveness in form and function here is then further assisted by the extra long arrowhead tip seconds hand that really reaches to the edge there. The handset, beyond all else, evokes the feel of the Newman glory days. The sandwiched, baton-faceted hour and minutes hand also gives you a subtle nod with that vintage style, but in no way to the detriment of the general modernity of this much later model. Speaking of modern, we have white gold applied hour markers with lumen over luminescence and an applied crown, the latter giving space in the lume, helping greatly with the orientation in low light. The markers are rather unusual and boat-shaped, tipped towards the center, but somehow they just work. A charming detail is the pleasingly symmetrically placed V-shape of the subsidiary dials. We have, of course, 12 hours on the top left. At the bottom 6 we have the seconds for the main time, and then 30-minute register there towards the right. They are sunken in with concentric circles, giving the metallic silver sections a lovely texture and finish. The name Daytona is then proudly printed in a candy apple red, breaking away from the rest of the restrained color scheme, but I think deservedly so, highlighting its rich legacy. Framing all of this masterfully is of course the micro-edged rehort there, giving it just a little dash more refinement. So I really should address the negatives. Personally, I would prefer the center links to be brushed in a more traditional oyster style bracelet. I actually had this bracelet on a newer Datejust many moons ago, and it kind of irritated me. It was such a smudge magnet. Now, if they changed that, they would have to change the case as well, because of course, traditionally in most oyster cases, we have the brushed top of the lugs. So they'd have to change that too. I think I'd prefer it, give it more of a tool aesthetic, closer to its the roots of the and the vintage models, of course. The other big negative is, of course, the price. When you compare it to its main rival, the Speedmaster, which, okay, yes, now it's a moon watch, but initially it was a racing chronograph as well. It seems like a really big jump up in price. Is it worth it? Well, that's another video entirely. Personally, I think for this particular version it is, and I'm willing to pay that, even though it is, well, we're talking long-term grail territory. I can't help but thinking, my God, you know, I could buy 3 Speedies, several more Navi timers, all the rest of it for the same money. My last little criticism is the seconds hand of the chronograph. I would have loved to have it with loom. If you've seen my little Benrus, the field watch, what they did, it has a very similar arrow-tipped seconds hand, and they actually painted it with loom, just so it has a bit more legibility in low light. But really, that's about it. I think it's an outstanding watch. Some may criticize it for the lack of date. Personally, I don't mind. I kind of like that. And none of the symmetry or lines of symmetry are interrupted. So it absolutely works for me. So in conclusion, this is a watch with all the inherent durability Rolex is loved and known for, but specially adapted for a complication we don't typically think of as tough and robust. What I appreciate the most about this configuration is the color scheme and the steel material that makes it compatible with just about any strap, any situation, or any attire. Once again, we see supreme versatility and brand bankability that makes it very hard to take that crown away from Rolex and give it to any other brand. This is the almost perfect luxury chronograph, free of any of the flashiness the more louder versions have, that sometimes diminishes the classy elegance that we definitely see here. But best of all, it can still do exactly what it was originally intended for, with supreme performance, while simultaneously capturing that sense of motor racing thrill, rich heritage, and adventure. This all translates to the wearer, so no wonder I was endlessly smiling while wearing it. Undoubtedly, the ultimate racing luxury watch. Anyway guys, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what your thoughts of the Daytona are, and any alternatives I should take a look at, certainly before I consider even pulling the trigger on this one. So far I'm leaning towards the two-tone with the black dial, but anyway, let's see. I'm going to give it some time. So let me know your thoughts, queries, comments, opinions, all the rest of it down below. Please don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and found it useful, and as always guys, I will catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.